I said to love, it is not now as in old days, when men adored thee.
So I'd like to start really by asking you about English song and its place in the whole canon, because in some ways, English song, it's redolent of things like ditties and ballads, and I'm afraid Hey Nonny Knows, and
a
and
bit of fa la la, yeah.
Yes, and it doesn't sometimes sort of come across with the gravitas that Lieder and Chanson even has. So what do you think of the repertoire, and having done so much of it, and how does it sit with your German Lieder, your highbrow singing?
Well, it sits very comfortably, that's the first thing, because a lot of it is where I started. Particularly even before I was a choral scholar, I was learning English song, starting with Purcell and then going up through Quilter. I think was probably one of the first pieces I sang as a sort of freshly broken voice. And the obvious thing, therefore, is because it was in my language. I could have an affinity, even though I might not understand all of the sort of Shakespearean fa-la-la language, still singing in English was a very obvious way in for me. And then that got my face around art song. And then I could then go from there into German as best I could at the age of 20. Gosh, my accent must have been filthy. But so I think, therefore, English song is very personal to me because it's where I started, and it's because it's something that is easily accessible, and that puts my sort of framework out of kilter slightly. If we wanted to say, for the sake of argument, that the cream of art song was written in Germany, German-speaking countries, Germany and Austria, around the turn of the 19th century, if we wanted to sort of put that out there, and that everything else kind of is measured up against that, then I think you might feel that English song is is lower down even than French melody, if you wanted to rate them. And I think English audiences and English singers and English teachers have been embarrassed by that sort of feeling of inferiority ever since. But I don't view it in that way, as explained, because I came to it in a different direction, and therefore I feel myself free of such judgments. I just think the English song I know from the beginning of the early 20th century, it speaks my language in so many different ways. It's not just obviously
And do you think there is a thread that continues, from Purcell through to Quilter and to Britten? I mean, is there a sort of a sense of an arc, and the more you do, and all the John Ireland that you've done as well, that there's a kind of connection that runs through it?
I think some composers, particularly I'm thinking of people like Warlock, and then very specifically Britten, were very aware of the heritage of Purcell in his time, the late Renaissance into early Baroque and what have you, and hence their enjoyment of the dare we say, the Hey Nonny No poetry. There's a huge amount of Elizabethan poetry going on in Quilter and Warlock and Merlin and so forth. And I suspect that was harking back to an early age, and let's not forget Dowland and his contemporaries as well, and Morley and Burton, all that sort of stuff. So there was, I'm sure they looked back and saw a flowering, a golden age of English song back then, and sought to emulate it in some ways through their choice of poets and poetry. And then I think it feels as though once they had flexed their muscles in that area, they then looked to more contemporary poets for inspiration. But I think of Parry and Stanford, and indeed to a certain extent Somerville as well, at the head of all of this, whose songs have slipped slightly into obscurity in comparison to some of the names I just mentioned. And they seem to be writing in a much more Germanic style. So I feel with some of the Parry and Stanford that I'm singing currently a program, in actual fact, right. If I translated the lyrics into German, you would be thinking, oh, that's Brahms. Is that a Brahms song? I don't know that, So it's just, it's what we know, isn't it? But But then, yeah, in the 20th century, then I think that this British composers found their voice a bit more. Vaughan Williams sort of spearheading that with Holst alongside, and all, and then there was this flowering. So to answer your question at last, yeah, I think there is a definite harking back to the glory days of Elizabethan Tudor composers.
And what do you think of the language? What is English like to sing in? I mean, a lot of people think, say, oh, English is awful to sing in because it's quite a closed language, and of course everybody loves singing in Italian, and German has such expressive consonants. And
yes.
What does English have in terms of its qualities as a language to sing in?
Well, I think it's got a bit of everything because it's such a mongrel potpourri of a language. So we have the percussive consonants from German, which makes German so expressive and wonderful to sing. We've got quite a bit of that. We have some very interesting diphthongs as well. So we go for the brightness of the Italian vowels and lots of stuff. Here's where the Welsh come into their own, incidentally. Sort of long, bright vowels, and then we bend them into our famous British diphthongs, which can be a little bit tricky to negotiate. I wonder if it's true that whatever your mother tongue, when you sing in your own language, you unconsciously make, maybe don't try so hard, because the effort of singing another language, of learning how to pronounce it and learning how to think in it, the effort requires so much more of your conscious brain. When you sing in your own language, you relax a little bit. And so it's quite interesting, anybody singing in their own languages, when you listen to them, first of all, your first reaction is, that's a true German singer. That's a true English person singing. Oh, he's Russian, definitely a Russian singer there. And your second thought is, I can't really understand the words. Because they're not making the effort. For example, I mean, it's not an example of someone mumbling their own language, but for example, of someone who sings very clearly in their second language. When I hear Bryn Terfel singing in English, yes, I can sometimes hear my own language with a clarity that I don't hear in other singers who sing in their first language. And he is extraordinarily expressive in English.
I suppose that as an English singer, you are not really taught how to sing in English in the way that you might be in German or Italian, that you actually have voice, language coaching, which actually gives you an idea of how to deliver those languages. And did you actually have to really think about how to deliver English in song?
Yes, I did, or I have come to think about it. It's not a feeling that I had to, but I've come to, because I've spent so long in the last 10 years, particularly over my Schubert cycles project, I've become so nerdy about how I sing my German. And I've got a particular German coach I work with, and we've been going into incredible depth over the last 10 years in it, that has caused me to consider how I sing English in that same depth. One of the things, for example, the first time I was singing in English with Julius Drake at the piano, it was a fairly new relationship. We'd been rehearsing for a bit, and Julius looked up at me and said, "Roddy," "why do you roll all your R's? Why do you roll all your R's?" He said to me, and I said, "Do I? Oh, do I?" And once he had pointed it out, I realized that I was, and it was sounding a little bit arch. And in fact, one of the glorious things about listening to, well, I don't know if it's glorious, one of the things about listening to these Naxos CDs that I've recorded over what would it be, for almost a 10-year period, is that my way of singing in English has changed as I got older. And if you listen to some of the early Finzi discs, you will hear me rolling my R's every single time one comes past. It sounds like someone operating a drill. But I've just learned to relax that a bit as I got older. So yes, it is interesting for me to be able to hear that difference, that change.
Yes. I mean, do you think that now, I mean, it's now that Naxos has collected all these songs together, and we can hear them as a set, there's a great connection between song and identity and national identity. And of course, those sorts of subjects are becoming quite big in the world at the moment. Yes. I mean, do you think it's important to have a sort of a canon of song that expresses a sort of a sense of your national identity?
I think it is. I think it is important to have that, in the sense that it is then one's gift to the world, as it were. Does that sound more pompous than it's meant to? What I mean by that is there is a political thread of nationalism whereby you identify what you feel is your national characteristics, and then you set out to defend it by pushing anyone else away and saying, this is ours, this is only ours, you don't belong. And the way I do this, I wrap my flag around myself and then I push the borders back and all that. You know what I'm talking about.
Yes.
And I think that one of the glorious things about music is that you can express a national identity and then offer it out. So one of the most glorious things I find is when I'm coaching or maybe just listening to a concert in another country, or indeed in this country, and someone from some far-flung country offers me an English song to coach. I think that's always one of it. I feel it, you know, I don't need to, but I feel it's such a compliment. Yes. That someone says, I've got this song by Quilter I found, you know, I think, oh, that's brilliant. I love that. Thank you for singing it. I coached someone quite recently who was singing Gurney's Sleep. Yes. I remember Ian Partridge suggesting that Gurney's Sleep, I think it was Ian, was suggesting that Sleep is one of the finest English art songs, full stop. You know, we'll put it up there at the top. And I thought, yeah, I quite like that as an idea. So there was this chap, he's an Italian-American singing it, and he sang it like Caruso. An entirely different style, and it gave us a lot to talk about an English singing style. But for me, the most important thing was that he was fired up by Gurney's Sleep, and he wanted to sing it, you know, alongside whatever else he's saying, you know, Du bist mein ganzes Herz, or whatever it was he was singing normally, or, you know, Nessun Dorma or stuff. So like I say, this feeling of slight inferiority about our precious English song, that other singers from all around the world think, oh, that's worth looking at. Who is this George Butterworth? Who is this Gerald Finzi? I say, oh, please, come to me, let me tell you. So that's what I mean by being a gift.
No, it's interesting, isn't it, that English is such an international language that everybody, you know, tends to speak a bit of English, and that there's sort of an access to the language all over the world, and yet somehow English song hasn't travelled that easily. I mean, it's something that people are getting into now. But what's your starting point when you're teaching people from other musical cultures how to sing English song? What tends to be the basis of building a sort of an approach?
That's a very interesting question, and I suppose the session I had with on Gurney's Sleep that I was just describing would be a good way in. It was unusual for me, that session. It stood out in my mind because often when people from other countries bring English song, they've already done so much work on it that I'm flabbergasted and, as I say, hugely flattered that they've spent that amount of effort on it. So if I, having talked about that chap bringing Sleep and singing it in a very different way, I contrast that with an experience I had beginning of this year coaching a youngish Dutch baritone on the Vaughan Williams Songs of Travel. And being Dutch, of course, the Dutch people in general are so fluid with their languages, and they can slip from one to another with such ease. And this young chap had absorbed the style of singing Vaughan Williams totally. It left me sort of flabbergasted, and then I was actually able to coach him on very specific, slightly nerdy aspects of English language, particularly singing diphthongs and things like that, and getting some of our words, our vowels to chime perfectly. So, you know, when someone sings in English so well that only 3 sounds stick out, it's very easy to help them with those 3 sounds. Whereas someone who hasn't put that amount of work into it, you think, all right, okay, I'm gonna have to roll my sleeves up and let's get the word "the" correct first. You know, that's a really difficult word to pronounce.
Yes, it is. Yes.
So actually, your question was really good, because I've centered in on the singing of the language, just getting the words to sound correct, and that, of course, is only a part of it. That's almost kind of the the frustrating let's get that bit out of the way part, because what I really want to do is get into the way the composer has expressed the poem, and that for me is the most fun part of it, is actually digging out what a poem means. And there's a great deal of subtext in English poetry. In particular, I'm sure in poetry of all types, but definitely in English poetry. And sometimes this thing about understatement is one of the great things about English poetry, is the stiff upper lip for which we're famous. Underneath there's this seething, raging pot of emotions flying left, right, but it's all done with, oh, isn't the sky blue, my dear? I love that. I love that. It's just.
Yes. I was going to ask you about how you came to bring together the collection that you have for Naxos, in terms of, did you always see it as a sort of a series of discs that would be ongoing, or when you did the first one, did you have an end in mind? And how did you choose the composers that you wanted to sing? Well, were you allowed to choose the composers that you wanted to sing?
I'm so glad you asked that question, because it gives me a chance to put on record, pardon the pun, but the story of this collection. I'm going to wave it at the camera so you can see. This is the collection CD by CD, as opposed to of my contributions, as opposed to the box set, which is a handy compact thing without all this plastic. And it looks, in retrospect, my contribution looks as though I'd planned this in some way. But that, of course, is not at all how it happened. How it happened, as I remember, is that someone somewhere asked me to record the first Finzi disc, which I have down here somewhere, the Shakespeare settings, that is Garland Spring, and Before and After Summer, and I Said to Love. Someone asked me to record this, and this was the first one, it was back in 2004. And I nervously, with great trepidation, did this recording for Naxos with Ian Burnside at the piano, very much kind of young, impressionable. When I say young, I must have been in my 30s, so not that young, but early in my recording career, doing a solo disc for Naxos. It was an amazing chance. I am still to this day not quite sure how my name floated up to the top of the pile of people to ask for this, but I'm so glad it did. And I had a tremendous amount of fun recording this. It's quite a scary thing. I remember the producer for this first disc was a man called Andrew Walton at KA Productions, and he is an ex-string player with the ECO, so he's got ears like what has good ears? An owl eyes. Just the most extraordinary ears for tuning as an ex-string player. And I remember doing a couple of takes with Andrew, and he came over the town and he said, "Okay, well done." He said, "I think we've got the first 3 bars in tune." He said, "It's terrifying." However, when I went in to have a listening take and sit down with Andrew, he was having such fun at the control desk. He was just loving the music. And at that moment, I realized, you're my man. You're my guy for this, because he loved the music that was coming out. And I thought at that time I would be lucky to get this single disc out, and that would be the end of it. But history then shows that was not true, because the second Finzi disc with Earth, Air and Rain came out a year or so later. And that led to, I think it was Britten that may have come next, which led to Vaughan Williams. Maybe the Vaughan Williams was first and then Britten afterwards. One disc seemed to lead to another. And it eventually, having got 3 or 4 or 5 of these under my belt, it got to a stage where we were getting inquiries from Naxos saying, these have been doing really well and it's lovely. Is there anything else you want to record? What about John Ireland? What about George Butterworth? But in the early days, I was just so grateful to have been given the opportunity. And so I owe someone or some people a great deal of thanks. I'm not sure who they are, but if they'd like to present themselves to me, I shall.
maybe if they see this, they'll crawl out of the woodwork and
yes, it would be yes, absolutely. There's a case of champagne going somewhere, isn't there?
Oh well, there we are. Well, it was me. Yes.
Because one thing I'll say about this, Ash, is that the reach of Naxos is global and kind of universal. So that this recording these CDs puts not only English song squarely into the frame, and this is, of course, I'm just talking about my contribution. Of course, the box set we're talking about is wide, particularly the ones that have been brought in from the old Collins label. So we've got a really good survey of English song here. So it doesn't just do that for English song. Of course, it did it for me personally as an artist. To be able to visit all parts of the globe, and the first time I ever sang in Japan, to have people come up to me with these discs and said, you know, could you sign here, as the collectors often do, showed just how far the reach goes. So it was no doubt for me as a youngish, middle-ish, 30s, 40s baritone, for my global reach to have these Naxos recordings behind me was incredibly useful, incredibly helpful.
It was quite interesting your talk about being in the recording studio, recording these songs, because in a way, song is storytelling, and you have to tell stories in from beginning to end. And presumably, the studio experience is rather different. You were saying you were stopped after a few bars, and you were had to think about the tuning, and in that sense, the voice isn't an instrument like an instrument that can tune or an instrument that's been pre-tuned. It's a very sort of sensitive instrument in terms of how it responds to words, and tunings are very, very different, or whatever. I mean, was there a lot of stopping and starting, and was that something you had to get used to in the recording studio?
Yeah, so recording solo voice and piano is a thing, and for one thing, I feel that we are all aware that a human voice is a limited resource. And so you might have a solo piano disc, for example, where the pianist keeps going until he's bleeding on the keys. At 3 a.m. someone says, "I think that's enough for today. Can we go home now?" But my voice just can't stand up to hours and hours like that. I like to think, just from a personal pride point of view, I like to think that I can call the end of the session before the producer comes in over the tenor and says, "Roddy, you're beginning to bray like a horse note. I can actually hear chords. Shall we stop for the day?" But when it's just me and the piano, I realize, first of all, that I need to keep positive the entire time, because, clearly, unless things go wrong, each and any take could be the one that ends up on the disc. I need it to be the best all the time, as far as I can manage, and to remain positive and strong in a studio, without lots of acolytes to come fawning up to me and say, "Oh, Roddy, that sounded spectacular. Oh, lovely." Without them, I can't afford them. Sorry, but so it's just me. I have to do that for myself and keep myself buoyant. But we found, particularly actually in that first recording session and thereafter, we got into a really useful, sensible rhythm of doing long takes when we can, so we can get a sense of flow and tell that story that you were referring to, and then patching things as necessary, without wanting to make it, wanting to obsess about making it perfect. Because I think probably when I approached recording in general, and the very first discs, I was worried about it being in some way seen as my testament. And then I would need to obsess about every last sound I made, every last quaver, every last syllable that I sang. I got into an area where I thought, no, this is a document of how I was singing at the time.
Yeah.
And often now, when young singers come up to me and say, "Oh, I'm learning Finzi, I heard your disc. It's interesting you go at that tempo." I say, well, that was the tempo we went that day.
Yes.
And the next day, we might have recorded the same thing at half the speed. I mean, no, not, but it's in a sense also a document of a semi-live occasion, rather than.
Yes, I always feel with some recordings that you can almost tell if the sun was shining that day or not. Let's talk a little bit now about somebody else who's very important in all this process and in your life doing these recordings, and that's Ian Burnside, the pianist. I mean, how vital is that relationship, and how does it evolve, and where did it spring from?
In reverse order, where did it spring from? I'm not sure. And I wonder if I've even asked Ian recently what our first engagement was together and how that relationship formed. Whether, I don't think it was Naxos who put us together, but it's quite possible that also happened. That it was a fait accompli. Roderick, you are working with Ian Burnside, get on with it. I'm more than happy to be told that and to work with people, because I love working with different pianists. And the way we work together in rehearsal, in preparation, just is very happy. There's a lot of playing and not so much talking. We communicate through doing rather than talking about it, and then we'll finish a song and then talk about something completely unrelated and then get back into it again. But so I don't remember exactly how it came to be, but it's been hugely enjoyable for me to get to know Ian well through these and through everything that's spun out of that. Like, for example, Ian's stewardship of the Ludlow English Song Festival, so which sort of springs naturally out of these CDs. So I don't know if there's a chicken and egg situation here, but that felt totally natural. I feel totally supported. One thing I will say is that it's very easy for me when I'm concentrating in the session or in rehearsals in general. It's very easy for me not to hear the piano. I'm concentrating so hard on the piano in a certain sense to give me my leads, to give me my tuning, to give me all sorts of emotion. But it's often when I'm listening to the first edits for these recordings that away from it and not concentrating on the doing, just listening now, it's often then that I have a revelation of how astonishingly Ian was playing all the time. I just had my ears on other things. This has happened time and time again. Like, really can then listen to the piano parts and listen to the way he plays and supports me and makes micromanaging decisions of what voice he's going to lead within the piano parts that I just haven't heard at all in the sessions. There are many times when I've contacted him after hearing first edits and just said, "Hey, by the way, Ian, that was astonishing playing."
Do you practice by yourself? I mean, do you when you're learning these songs, it must be quite strange in a way, not having, because it's such an intimate partnership between a pianist and a singer, and to learn them by yourself must be quite a lonely thing.
Yes, it is a bit. There's lots of grunt work to be done, and yes, making sure I know how the tunes go. Let me take you right back to that first CD, the Finzi CD with Let Us Garland Spring. Let Us Garland Spring is one of the first song cycles I ever learnt. I think when my voice broke, I sang Come Away Death. It's one of my first songs, Come Away, and what have you. So I knew that very well, but I Said to Love, the short Finzi cycle of only 6 songs, was completely new to me. So I had to learn that. And I do that work by myself, sitting close to, but not at the piano, because I can't get anywhere near these piano parts. The Finzi's piano writing is way beyond my humble skills. So I can do only so much of learning the notes and getting it sorted and learning the poetry and getting it sorted and just seeing where my problems are until I work with Ian. And then I can hear how the whole thing, the whole piece fits together, which, as I say, why our rehearsals are often spent doing rather than talking about it. Ian's also, I hope he never sees this, because otherwise, I'll be saying intimate details about our work. But one thing I've observed about Ian is that he's a private man when it comes to his practice. I don't hear him practice so much. Right. When I turn up at his house to rehearse, wherever it is rehearse, he is kind of already brilliant. Which makes it look
just like reading. So
yes, exactly. It could be, for all I know. But the thing about it is that I don't get to see his hard work. He might, of course, say the same about me, because I've done all my hard work alone. And we meet together and we assemble what we've got. And either one of us or both of us will say, "Oh, I'm terrible about that," whatever. And then we, quietly brilliant in the way musicians, British musicians in particular, like to be. But but we keep our workings to ourselves, and then put together something that's hopefully already in a useful state.
A little while ago, we had a conversation about gender in song, because you were singing Schumann's song cycle for mezzo, mezzo soprano, and we were talking about, are there songs that only one gender can sing, and does that arise very much in this repertoire, that there are songs that are sort of specifically written for a voice, or
I'm sure there are, and as I talk, like any politician, I'll try and think of the answer. I'm sure there are songs, and as soon as one comes to my mind, I would then ask, well, why can only a man, or why can only a woman sing this? Or indeed, someone who doesn't count themselves necessarily as either, because we're talking about quite a wide frame of what is one and what's the other. You know what I mean? And for example, in the same way as German language art song has developed over the years, over the centuries, a way that certain cycles are sung by men only and certain cycles are sung by women, without anybody really discussing how that came to be. There are lots of English song cycles like Let Us Garlands Bring, the Finzi. Why don't I start with that? Vaughan Williams' Songs of Travel, that we associate with men. Even Butterworth, Six Songs from a Shropshire Lad. We are used to seeing men sing them, and that's the way it has been. And we are now at a junction, which I think is very exciting, of just saying, does it always have to be that way? And if so, why? So recently, I know a lot of mezzos. Kitty Whately pings straight into my mind, and also Katie Rudge, as people who've sung and programmed and broadcast Let Us Garlands Bring, sung by mezzos. Hooray!
Yes.
Yeah.
I think in a way we're more used to the mezzo voice singing male's roles, aren't we? Because in the opera, but the idea of a man's voice singing, a woman's words, as it were, is still slightly sort of revolutionary in some ways. So
yes, it is, and because I've been thinking about this a lot, I will come up with my stock answer, which I've been preparing just for this occasion. So one of the songs I sing is Schubert's "Death and the Maiden," which, if you know the song, the maiden's there singing, "Oh no, don't take me so soon. I'm still young, please." And then Death comes and says, "Just give me your hand, my dear, and I'll come and rest with me." So there are two characters. The girl speaks, and then Death. So everybody for all these years has been very comfortable with a single singer doing that. You could do it as a duet very easily, because it says "Das Mädchen," the girl, and it says "Der Tod," Death. But we're very used to Fischer Dieskau, for example, singing both, and being very feminine in his opening, "Vorüber, ach vorüber," and then very magisterial and death-like in the second part. So nobody has had any problem with a man singing a girl's words there.
I thought one terrible moment you were going to sing. You said you were going to sing it in a falsetto voice.
Thank you. Challenge accepted. Yes. Okay. Hang on. One of these days, I'll raise a few eyebrows. But because we're storytelling, we can inhabit any character, and that is my aim. So when I sing Schumann's Frauenliebe und Leben, then I inhabit a character, as I do in any sort of anything. And Mahler's Knabenwunderhorn settings pop into my head as things full of characters of men and women answering each other in dialogue. And I've sung some of the Mahler's duets, and then I've sung them all on my own and just inhabit roles, which I love. I love being several different people in one song. Like Schubert's Earl King, for example, pops into my head again as being narrator, father, son, and Earl King. And you just assume a different character. That's part of the fun. It's acting,
Now, and just let's sort of wind things up a bit, and just I'm going to ask you, that very difficult and annoying question, which is, what are your highlights? What are the songs that sort of perhaps surprised you because you didn't know them when you first met them, and things that you love doing, particularly in all these series. You've done six CDs. So what are the highlights for you?
Yeah. So I can begin with a diplomatic answer, which I said already before. The opportunity to record them at all was the most extraordinary gift. I count myself as being so lucky to have been around at the point when Naxos was thinking, we'd like to record an English art song. Who shall we get? And my name floated to the top of the pile. Amen and Alleluia. I was just so grateful for that. That's one highlight, the whole lot. Secondly, you asked me, what did I learn? Because in recording large collections of songs, there are, of course, songs I know well, like Let Us Garlands Bring, and things that are new to me, like I Said to Love by the same artist. So often in any survey of a composer like George Butterworth or Vaughan Williams, there are songs that I've not come across before that are so exciting. We all know Butterworth's Shropshire Lad. Well, those of us who love art song, of those, we all know Butterworth's Shropshire Lad. But there are other settings of Houseman on that disc, and there are some just delightful folk song settings, which once you've heard them, well, some of them last 1 minute 15 seconds. All 6 verses, and they are so mesmerizing that you'll be humming them the rest of the day. I loved recording those. Similarly, Britten, I'll come back to Britten. Vaughan Williams, I did the Songs of Travel, which I know very well, but the House of Life is something I'd been championing for some time and didn't know so well. I was really pleased to record that. The House of Life is twinned with a piece called Willowwood for baritone and piano, later orchestrated baritone orchestra and wordless female chorus, which Naxos invited me to do about a year after I'd done the Vaughan Williams disc. This is an awesome cantata. Rossetti poems, the same as the House of Life poems. They're all Rossetti sonnets, Dante Gabriel Rossetti. And Vaughan Williams has a thematic link between the two. And if I hadn't recorded Willowwood, I would have forever wondered why there's a random theme at the very opening of the first songs of the House of Life, which he quotes. And it doesn't turn up anywhere else. And I thought, what is this piece of music? Where's it come from? Why doesn't he make reference to it? It's because it refers to another work he wrote. And so through the joy of recording for Naxos, I managed to marry these two pieces together. I'm a huge champion of Willowwood because I think it's a great thing. It won't be in the box set because it's not voice and piano, but I urge anybody to complete their full edition by rushing out and getting hold of Willowwood. It's got Towards the Unknown Region. It's David Lloyd-Jones conducting the Liverpool, the Royal Liverpool Orchestra Philharmonic. So that's just an extra disc that a must-have disc. So that's also definitely a highlight.
Well, once I worked my way through this very substantial collection that Naxos has given me, I will definitely do that. But I mean, just to say, Roddy, thank you so much for talking about these amazing recordings, and they are really quite unique in terms of songs. And I've been sitting here in lockdown in front of my window, looking out over the Somerset countryside, listening to you sing. And there's something that sort of almost sort of spiritually connects, and there's a sort of something that grows out of the English landscape and a particular sort of English quality of light. And of course, a sense of words and understatement that infuses these songs, and I think you capture it absolutely beautifully. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Ash. And I can think of no better way to listen to them. That sounds glorious.
I will make you brooches and toys for your delight.